Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Gregory Wilpert, coming to you from Quito, Ecuador. Latin America's largest construction company, Odebrecht, agreed with the U.S. Justice Department to pay a fine of up to $4.5 billion on Wednesday for having engaged in widespread bribery of government officials around the world. The agreement is the largest penalty in U.S. history under the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act of 1977. According to court documents, Odebrecht, which is based in Brazil, and its subsidiary Braskem, a petrochemical products company, paid almost $800 million in bribes to government officials in 12 countries, including Brazil, Mexico, Colombia, Peru, Dominican Republic, Venezuela, Angola, and Mozambique. After the U.S. Justice Department made the announcement, governments that were affected by the revelation issued statements that they will investigate who received these bribes. For example, Peru's president, Pedro Pablo Kuczynski, had the following to say.
Esto está todo en la fiscalía y lo van a tener que averiguar y se tendrá que también traer a la gente de Odebrecht que explique a quién se le pagó esa plata, ¿no?
¿Los presidentes de esos periodos tienen que rendir explicaciones también?
Mire, yo creo que sí, pero también hay que ver a quién se le pagó, ¿no? Porque hasta ahora lo único que hay es una suma gruesa de $30 millones más o menos.
Joining us to take a closer look at this newest corruption scandal is Rafael Ioris. He is Associate Professor of Latin American History and Politics at the University of Denver. Also, he is the author of Transforming Brazil, a history of national development in the post-war era. Thanks for being with us today, Rafael.
Sure, thank you for having me.
So let's start with the reaction that this announcement had in Brazil. Already, investigations into Odebrecht's promotion of corruption in Brazil have resulted in the conviction of the company's CEO, Marcelo Odebrecht, who is now serving a 19-year prison sentence. Also, many other politicians have been indicted or under investigation in connection with Odebrecht bribes. So how is Brazil's political class now reacting to this latest development as far as you can tell?
Well, first, we need to really make the point that Odebrecht really is a huge corporation that plays a major role in Brazilian economy and certainly as well in the Brazilian political system, and that has been true for many, many years. The investigations in Brazil have really been unfolded in the last 2 years at least, during this so-called car wash operation from the public ministry, the prosecutors in Brazil. As you mentioned, former president of the company, Marcelo Odebrecht, the heir of scion of the family, has been in prison now for several months. Has been condemned in repeated charges, and that has been sort of in the core of the political debate and much of the economic crisis going on in Brazil today. The car wash operation has really been a turning point in the political system, amounting to a lot of concern and uncertainty throughout the political system, throughout most important political parties, and certainly is somewhat also involved in the current political crisis leading to the impeachment of Dilma Rousseff, the former president of Brazil, that was impeached in August of this year.
And as you mentioned, it's a major corporation, Odebrecht, and certainly has a long history in Brazil since it was founded in 1944, I believe. Now it's one of the largest construction companies in the world. Can you tell us a little bit about its history and particularly its involvement in shaping or its influence on Brazilian politics?
Sure. Again, it's been a company that has been around for many years, and it really it was a local construction company in the 40s and 50s, and it really grew and expanded to become a giant corporation. And it's a giant corporation tied mostly to contracts with the government, especially the federal government, but throughout all levels of government. So it's not a construction company that is really focused on building like housing or private deals. It's mostly governmental deals. It really became a giant during the dictatorship in Brazil, which ruled the country from 64 to 85. And especially in the 1970s, when the economy was growing very rapidly, largely through disbursement of major sums of money from the federal government, including from foreign borrowing. So Odebrecht, along with several other major construction companies, Odebrecht, Andrade Gutierrez, Mendes Jr., they really expanded their activities and depended on these major contracts from the government to build infrastructure, public works throughout the country. So they really had much of their history being tied and dependent on the government. It's really hard to imagine economic growth in Brazil and really Brazilian capitalism in the last years without making sense of this nefarious connection, this marriage made in hell really between the federal government and these major construction companies that in the last 15 years have really expanded overseas. I mean, already starting in the 70s, 80s, but major, especially Odebrecht in the last 10 years, now with operations in over 20 countries in the world. So this relationship is really speaks to the core of how politics and the functioning of the economy and much of the economic growth when it has taken place in this last 40 years dependent on expenditures from the federal government, and much of that has been tied to major infrastructure works, public works throughout the country with this major sort of cartel of 4 or 5 major construction companies.
You referred to this as a kind of a nefarious connection or a marriage in hell. I'm wondering, is that, I mean, why you say it, put it that way? I mean, has it always been involved in corruption? I mean, has there always been like some level of kickbacks during the dictatorship? And is this kind of the way that Odebrecht really became such a powerful corporation in Brazil?
Yeah, we have a lot more data in terms of specific deals, including with this plea bargain now with the Justice Department here in the United States for this, especially the last 15 years. But it's known, and some new publications and studies have been produced in the last few years about these connections already, especially during the dictatorship. As you can imagine, dictatorship in Brazil, as you know, dictatorships in most places at least, are veiled in censorship, and it's hard to really figure out what was going on. And that's a little bit the role of history, hindsight to make sense of what was happening. But it's very much of a certain thing that the expansion of these major construction companies, now really corporate giants in Brazil and now overseas even, tied to these contracts with the government, always have involved some level of bribes and kickbacks and overcharges and contracts that have always been produced by a lot of political influence from these executives and key politicians in the political system, throughout the political system, involving most political parties during the dictatorship, but especially since the redemocratization in Brazil has taken place in the mid-'80s.
So, as I mentioned in the introduction, the case involves hundreds of millions of dollars to government officials in most of Latin America, and you also already mentioned that it really expanded throughout the world. What do you think that this case says about the role of private corporations in Latin American politics and the persistence of corruption in the region?
Sure. First thing, it's interesting and somewhat ironic, if not even tragic, that on the one hand, it would be a good thing. Most Latin American countries, including Brazil, have way more restricted laws for donations to political parties and campaigns than the United States. And with allotments of public funding and allotment of time for the campaigns, public time in airways and TVs. But that has not, unfortunately, been enough to curb donations, especially from huge corporations such as these constructions as well as banks, the two sort of main elements of the economy, key major actors in the economy, to political parties and political campaigns. So, which is to say that they have and they continue to play this nefarious role in the political system, despite attempts to curb this. And this is an ongoing debate in Brazil for the last several years. Should we go full board with only public money to fund campaigns or not? There's no agreement, especially now with the conservative backlash in the political system in Brazil. It's very hard to imagine something along those lines. The government has really been tarnished. The idea of government, the idea of the public sector running things have really been tarnished in terms of, should we give more role for the government in running elections? Should we just kind of go full board with a system that allows even more free money to flow around? So it has really been around for a while, and it continues to play a role despite attempts to curb, to regulate, to address this. That is certainly true for all the Latin American countries. In addition to corrupting and bribing executives in or officials in the executive branch, It also, I think, it plays a role, the fragmented nature of politics, congressional politics in most Latin American parties then certainly would be advisable, and certainly way more parties than the two-party system in the United States. And that leads to the fact that most ruling coalitions in the executive depend on the support from Congress, the old presidential systems, to approve legislation by ad hoc disbursement of funds to specific key political leaders, especially by means of construction operations, public works in their own constituencies. And therefore enhances the interest of the construction companies to be given money to fund the campaigns of these legislators, who then will only provide support in Congress to the constructions are built in their states of origin, and in that sense also big constructions tied to the companies that have supported, that have basically paid for their campaigns. So it becomes this circle that involves the private sector, the executive branch, and the legislative branch.
And I just want to turn quickly at the end towards the question of what this means for the relations between the U.S. and Latin America. That is, it's in a way, it's an unusual case because it's the largest fine to be paid under the U.S. Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, but doesn't involve very many U.S. entities themselves, it seems. So what do you think the settlement says about U.S. The role of the United States actually in Latin America and U.S.-Latin American relations?
Sure. The plea states that this is a sort of an operation that has involved cooperation from the prosecutors in Brazil, Switzerland, and the United States. But of course, it's a plea produced largely by actions of the justice system in the United States. But they state that they are cooperating with Brazilian and Swiss authorities, and that some of the fines will actually, most of it will be reversed back to the Brazilian government as a way to restitute, all this corrupt money. I think on the one hand, we first have to remember a little bit of the irony of this. The federal government, the U.S. federal government, and the U.S. foreign policy towards especially Latin America, for historically has been one of at least condescending paternalism, or at worst much more nefarious things, interventions, but certainly supporting authoritarian, corrupt governments for much of the Cold War, to at least. So it's a little bit ironic now that the federal, U.S. system is trying to clean its act and to play this more constructive role. But on the other hand, it potentially is a good thing that it will, has and could, help address these investigations and support the investigations, and hopefully curb some of these corrupt deals, very, very present in the Brazilian and Latin American political systems. So perhaps, one hopes that it will help to redress a little bit of that legacy. But there is also some other ironies involved. I mean, the United States is in a way playing a little bit of still of this, overstretched authority over the region, and trying to really, teach Latin Americans how. With that caveat of a little bit of the irony, one hopes that it could be a good thing. But we also have to remember a little bit of the nationalism involved in some of this, especially from some Latin American leaders. I mean, you mentioned Peru, but we can certainly think, you are in Quito now, of the nationalist government of Rafael Correa in Ecuador, how unhappy they would be, and they could spin this in a way to say, this is gringo imperialism trying to intervene in the way we do things here. Hopefully, this won't escalate too much, and we actually can get to the what's more substantive elements of this, and cooperation to curb corruption may actually unfold. But it's still a little bit too soon to be seen. In Brazil, this is the news of the day. Every day it's sort of a moving target. We'll see what happens. I'm not very optimistic, to be honest, in terms of if this will produce an actual reform of the political system, curbing corruption. But it's anyone's guess at this point. The Brazilian political landscape is very, very fluid at this moment. The current president, which was the vice president of the former impeached president, might himself be removed from power early this next year, or not. No one knows that yet. So we'll see. We'll see what that will lead to.
Okay, great. Well, thanks so much, Rafael, for having joined us today.
Sure, my pleasure.
And thank you for watching the Real News Network.